God is dead. Perhaps the most striking phrase of the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the most influential thinkers in history. With a life marked by tragedy, Nietzsche went from being a potential Christian pastor to one of the fiercest atheists, only to end up shipwrecked in the worst kind of madness. His biography is the best gateway to his thought, so in this video, I'm going to explain it to you. Nietzsche was born on October 15, 1844, in Rücken, Germany. At the age of 4, his father, a famous Protestant pastor, died, possibly from some kind of brain illness. After this, one night, Nietzsche dreamed of a dark figure, probably his father, entering the house and taking his younger brother from the cradle. Shortly afterward, the brother also died at the age of 2. Nietzsche then moved with his mother and sister to his grandmother's house, living surrounded by women, since 2 of his aunts were also there. In 1858, at the age of 14, he entered the prestigious school of Forda, where he was introduced to the reading of the classics. Determined to follow in his father's footsteps and with apparently unshakable faith, at school, he was called the Little Pastor. At this age, he also wrote a brief autobiography, From My Life, in which one can read lines like the following: "I have already lived through many things, joyful and sorrowful, pleasant and unpleasant, but I know that in all of them God has guided me with the same certainty as a father guides his tender little child. I have made the firm decision to devote myself forever to his service." Wow, Nietzsche must have been the inventor of plot twists. Well, yes, because in October 1864, he enrolled in theology at the University of Bonn, but ended up attending the classes of the philologist Friedrich Nietzsche and fell in love with philology. Around that time, he also read The Life of Jesus by David Strauss, which questioned the Jesus of Christianity, and, convinced by its arguments, he lost his faith and directly embraced atheism. And why go to that extreme? It's not as if the only options were Christianity and atheism, but commenting on the book with his good friend Paul Deussen, he said the following: "The matter has a serious consequence. If you abandon Christ, you must also abandon God." So for Nietzsche, it seems it was either Christ or nothing. After a heated argument with his mother, who wholeheartedly wanted him to become a pastor, Nietzsche abandoned his theological studies and enrolled in philology in Leipzig in October 1865. And note this, in February of that same year, he had visited Cologne, and after asking a guide to show him the sights of the city, the man thought of taking him to a brothel. Apparently, Nietzsche felt so embarrassed that as soon as he entered, he didn't know what to do. He saw a piano in a corner, went over to it, and started playing. He returned another day and probably contracted syphilis. Around that same time, he discovered The World as Will and Representation, the great work that no one has ever read by Arthur Schopenhauer. Nietzsche did read it. Not only that, he seems to have understood it, and it made a very deep impression on him, which is quite something because it's an enormous tome. On October 9th, 1867, he entered military service, but a horse riding accident in early March of the following year forced him to return to academic life. That same year, he met the famous musician Richard Wagner, with whom he formed a close friendship that would later break apart in the most dramatic way possible. On February 10th, 1869, he was appointed professor of philology at the University of Basel. And not only that, on March 23rd, he was awarded a doctoral degree unanimously, without having written a dissertation or anything, simply because of the quality of his research. In 1872, he published his first book, The Birth of Tragedy from the Spirit of Music, which was not well received at all. In it, he argues that Greek tragedy is the result of the fusion of 2 principles: the Apollonian, a principle of order, measure, rationality, and the Dionysian, a principle of chaos, disorder, passionate excess, and so on. The triumph of Socrates and his great disciple Plato would have meant the historical death of tragedy, since these thinkers and the tradition that followed them prioritized the Apollonian, the rational, as the ideal, and scorned the Dionysian as something bad and vicious. As I was saying, the work received a lot of criticism from the academic world of the time, because Nietzsche strayed far from the philological method that was then considered scientific. Still, it's well worth reading because, despite its dense style, it already contains many of the key intuitions of Nietzschean thought. In 1873, he wrote his essay On Truth and Lies in a Non-Moral Sense, in which he criticizes the very concept of truth as a mask of power, and argues that the human claim to knowledge is nothing more than a delusion of grandeur. Although it became highly influential in later philosophy, think of Foucault or Derrida among others, Nietzsche never actually published this text for one reason or another. He then began to suffer from terrible headaches that made it impossible for him to live or work normally. Because of this, he abandoned teaching and academic life in 1879. However, he was able to support himself thanks to the University of Basel, which, largely due to the intervention of his friends, especially Franz Overbeck, granted him something like a lifetime pension. Let's see when that happens to me. By the way, if you're enjoying this video and it's helping you learn about Nietzsche's life, please give it a like. It costs you nothing and helps me reach many more people. And with the life Nietzsche had, he deserves it. In December 1879, he published The Wanderer and His Shadow, a truly beautiful work of aphorisms in which Nietzsche constantly reflects on the loneliness he himself felt in his life. He moved to Sils Maria in Switzerland, where he would spend almost all his summers and much of the rest of his life. He loved it there. In that place, he wrote Dawn, a much more optimistic text, although in it, he already claims to be beginning his campaign against morality. In 1882, he met a young woman, Lou von Andreas Salome, with whom both he and his friend Paul Ray fell deeply in love. Nietzsche proposed marriage to her twice, but was rejected both times. He ended up in the friend zone. So there you have it. If it happened to one of the most interesting philosophers in history, it also makes sense if it happens to you. When he discovered that Lou was secretly spending more time with Paul, Nietzsche felt deeply betrayed by both of them and decided to abruptly cut off the friendship. But before doing so, he suggested immortalizing their relationship with a photograph, through which Nietzsche wanted to convey that Lou had always been in control of the relationship and had been treating both Paul and him like sheep. Although, if you ask me, Lou was very young, around 21, and Nietzsche was nearly 40, and he behaved quite poorly toward her. There's also this supposed photo of the three of them floating around the deep web, but it's faker than Leibniz's wig. By the way, I don't recommend you look it up. Unless you want to be traumatized, you pervert. Sunk into a depression because of this romantic betrayal, Nietzsche shut himself in his house and wrote, almost in one go, the first part of his masterpiece, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which he published in August 1883. He would go on writing and publishing the remaining 3 parts until 1885. With this work, Nietzsche, just look at the image he had of himself, claimed to have surpassed the limits of the German language. Written in a poetic narrative style and imitating the Gospels, because Nietzsche wanted with this work to write a new Bible for humanity, he created a kind of alter ego, the prophet Zarathustra, who would become the spokesperson for his most provocative ideas, the death of God, the ubermensch, Superman, and the eternal recurrence. In 1886, he published Beyond Good and Evil, where he returned to an essayistic style, and the following year he also published On the Genealogy of Morality. In these 2 works, he takes his critique of prevailing morality to the extreme. There he argues that the origin of morality lies in the conflict between masters and slaves, between the strong and the weak. Morality is the invention through which the slaves, the weak, the dregs of humanity, manage to clip the wings of the noble, the strong, those who were destined to dominate them all. The worst product of this slave mentality, which is based on resentment toward life because life has made them weak, and so they feel resentment toward that very life, is, according to Nietzsche, Christianity. With Christianity, a religion is invented that crucifies the human being on the altar of a God who is an absolute enemy of life. The little pastor, my ass. The year 1888 was incredibly prolific for Nietzsche. He wrote Twilight of the Idols, The Antichrist, and Ecce Homo, which is a kind of intellectual autobiography. The titles he gives to the chapters of Ecce Homo are hilarious. For example, Why I Am So Wise, Why I Am So Clever, Why I Write Such Good Books, Why I Am a Destiny, and so on. Although this is probably already a sign that he was not entirely mentally well, even so, in my opinion, it's the best book to start with if you're interested in Nietzsche's thought. Finally, on January 7th, 1889, he suffered a mental collapse in the streets of Turin when he threw himself at a horse to embrace it after seeing its owner whipping it. Tragically, Nietzsche never recovered from this. He spent the next decade under the care of his mother, and after her death in 1897, his sister took care of him. His mother never lost hope that her son would return to how he once was. In fact, in the book My Melancholy Joy, which collects letters she wrote to a married couple who were friends of hers, we find one of the best testimonies of a mother's love for her child. The same cannot be said of his sister, who swooped in like a vulture on the rights to Nietzsche's works and began editing, cutting, adding, and manipulating them in order to turn her brother into a champion of Nazism. Sadly, Nietzsche was in no condition to protest or even to be aware of it. He died on August 25th, 1900 of pneumonia.